Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jana Martin, Associate Director of the Language Institute at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the third session of our Fall 2021 series. The Language Collaboratory is a partnership for the advancement of intercollegiate dialogue on the teaching of languages and cultures, driven by language centers and institutes at the University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, the University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our aim is to provide collaborative professional learning opportunities for educators of language, culture, and literature at the 5 institutions. Our series this fall aims at furthering conversations on the topic of student engagement. We address this issue from 2 perspectives. First, research, and then a second, pedagogical and practical. We aim to share insights and to encourage interinstitutional dialogue, bridging the institutional distance and fostering a collaborative interchange of ideas. You are invited to contribute to what we hope will be a lively discussion. The sessions will be recorded and made available through each institution's website. We ask that you mute your microphone at the outset, that you use the tools in Zoom to contribute questions and comments in the chat, and during the open discussion period, please raise your hand virtually prior to activating your microphone. Closed captioning is available through the live transcript button in the Zoom menu bar. Today, we are pleased to welcome Stephanie Anderson and Adolfo Carrillo, both from the University of Minnesota. Adolfo will sit in for Dan Hataya, Senior Lecturer in the Department of German, Nordic, Slavic, and Dutch, who could not join us today. This session today is titled Social Annotation While Socially Distanced, Using Hypothesis in the Virtual Language Classroom. Before I pass the microphone on to Stephanie and Adolfo, I would like to encourage everyone to attend our next session, which will be held next Monday, October 18th at the same hour. Our discussant next week is Julie Sykes from the University of Oregon, and she will talk about digital spaces and games in the context of language teaching and learning. After today's session, you will receive an email to invite you to provide feedback about the session. Please consider doing so, and we appreciate your comments. Thank you and welcome. Adolfo and Stephanie, you're on.
Okay, I think that's me. Here we go. So I'm Stephanie Anderson. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. And yeah, let's get started. Excited to talk to you about hypothesis. I'm here with Adolfo sitting in for Dan, who is running the Boston Marathon today, which is very exciting for him. Very exciting for me to not be doing that. Actually, I'm much happier to be with all of you. So let's get started. So let's explode the chat. What do you think about, or actually, talk to me about annotation. How do you use annotation in your daily life? So head to the chat, and I call it explode the chat. Explode the chat with the answer to my question. How do you use annotation in your daily life? You see there's some over annotating anything when I'm reading, whether I need to remember it or not. Collaborative writing projects. Excellent. Okay, highlighting to remember, to reread, make connections to content, personal connections. Annotation sometimes takes the form of physical objects being placed in some places. Yeah, to remind me of some important to-dos throughout my day, like a post-it maybe, or a like clip. Yes, post-it. Great. I think we could even include annotation when I write on my hand, like as to remember. Okay, so great, thank you so much. Let's so a quick give an overview of where we're heading with this session today. We'll start by just talking about what is social annotation. We'll talk about hypothesis, what it is and what we can do with it. We'll talk about how we can use it in language courses. I'll give you an example of how I used it in my Spanish courses, and Adolfo will tell you about how Dan has used it in his Finnish classes. And then Adolfo will wrap us up with some things to remember, some pedagogical and technical considerations. All right, so what is social annotation? Let's go to the next slide. So annotation is nothing new. This is not my old college textbook, though some days I feel old enough that it might be, but it is not. This is, you know, from social annotation has been around for annotation has been around for a very, very, very long time. And so today we're going to explore what is this idea of social. What does it mean when we add social to the word annotation? Let's keep going. So let's, I think maybe I skipped this slide, Adolfo, before you, there we go. So annotation is not the end. Annotation is a means to things, it leads us to discussion, it leads us to conversation and dialogue. Annotation can help us build community. Annotation can be a tool that can lead us to writing, shared learning. Social annotation can lead us to reading and to create a shared understanding of something that we're reading. And we can go to the next slide. So how does social annotation impact reading? And that's what we're going to talk about with the examples that we're going to work through today. So social annotation makes reading active, it makes it visible, and it makes it social. So with social reading, we see that students are engaged. We see that they are thinking critically about the text, and they're doing that in a way in the form of a conversation with their classmates. It is a way to develop community between each other in a way that they can, as they're engaging, as they're discussing with each other, they're together creating this deeper reading of the text, a deeper understanding of what they're reading. And then they can bring that to perhaps a larger discussion, a larger class discussion, or can prepare them for some other form of discussion of a particular text, maybe a writing assignment or a project or a presentation. So 5 purposes of annotation. This comes from a book called Annotation. Annotation provides information, it shares commentary, it sparks conversation, it expresses power, and annotation aids learning. Number 4 is especially cool. Annotation expresses power in a way that it it provides a space for everyone to have a voice, everyone to put in their to be able to put in their 2 cents, to be able to say, here is something that I found that spoke to me, or here is something that I would like to highlight as important in this particular text, and here is why. So annotation is not a Canvas discussion. So we at the University of Minnesota use Canvas. So that is our learning management system. So replace Canvas with whatever learning management system you use, but annotation is not the same as your kind of online discussion forum. They serve different purposes. Discussions maybe are at a higher level, where annotations are kind of, as you talked about in the chat, they're just kind of, they're notes that you're making to yourselves, things you want to remember to maybe go back and connect to, or connections that you're making to your personal experience, your personal life. They're not meant to be sort of these very organized, thought out sort of things we might expect to see in a discussion board, for example. All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about how I used hypothesis in my composition and communication course. In the final unit, we study the novel Mosemillan by the Spanish author Ramon Sender, and students read the novel individually, and then they work in groups on a group project. And then students are in the same group for their hypothesis work. So the end result is this group project, and they're working through the novel on their own individually, reading it, but they're working through it through hypothesis. Each part of the novel, they're doing work in hypothesis. So they did receive a grade for their their work with the hypothesis assignment. It fell under the participation grade, and it was a very small amount of their grade. I did this because, well, for a few reasons. So I did this last semester, spring of 21. It was part of a pilot project here at the University of Minnesota. So this was a new thing for me to try. So I did not want to make it a big part of the grade in case it crashed and burned. But also I didn't want it to be, I wanted it to be low stakes, in that I didn't want students to, I didn't want students to be, I didn't want them to stress out about, oh, I have to say the right thing or have perfect grammar, or, you know, I wanted them to use it as a tool for them to help prepare, to help make sense of the novel. For many, this is the first time they read a novel in Spanish. So I wanted them to figure out how to use it best for themselves in order to prepare themselves as they're reading the novel, to support them as they're in the process of reading a novel, as well as support them as a group to create this project at the end. Okay, so getting started. So this is something I did not do last semester, and this is actually from this semester. So I've got some tips on how to get started. So I just did this a couple of weeks ago, getting started. So do a trial run. So a few weeks ago in class, this semester, we read an article, and I had students annotate this article, Hispanidad Mala Palabras. It fit with the unit that we're working on in class right now. And students were not in groups for this. We annotated it as one big class. I have about 15 students in the class. I gave them some discussion questions to just think about, and I made it just really low stakes. I'm just asking them, like, I asked them, you know, write 2 or 3 things. Just react to, you know, what is coming to mind as you read this. We watched a film. Can you relate anything to this film we watched? So I asked them to make 2 or 3 annotations and then reply. You can also reply to annotations with hypothesis. So make 2 to 3 annotations and then reply to 1 to 2. And I've asked them to write their annotations in Spanish, and I asked them to be specific and elaborate. avoid saying things like, oh, that's interesting, or me too, or I don't understand. So it is important to let students know what you'd like them to do, even if it is kind of a low stakes thing. And then at the end of this little assignment, I did say it, we'll use social annotation at the end of the semester in a larger project, excuse me. So, I want to do this to create a conversation about this particular article, but I want to do this activity to familiarize ourselves with this tool. So that's one recommendation I have to get you started. And then also be very clear about why, how, and when. So be clear about why. Why are we doing this? And you can see it bold in that box. This is a tool to help you and your group. I let them know that I have suggestions, I have ideas for how you might use it, but I'm encouraging them to come up with their own best practices for how they want to use it. And I want them to explore as they go. How? I talked to them about tagging. Tagging is super cool in Canvas. This allows them to kind of organize themselves. So, if they are finding things about a character, there's a character in the book called Paco. If they're finding characteristics about Paco and quotes about Paco, they could use the tag Paco, and then later they could come back and search by that tag, and they've got all of these amazing things they've pulled, they've highlighted essentially about Paco. And then I've asked them to use the tag Stephanie, my name, if there's anything they want me to specifically address, and then I can do the search for my name. And I can respond directly to them. I can see all of their comments that they make. But as the novel goes on and they make more and more annotations, it gets to be a lot. So I do not have the time, or really I don't want to. That's not my purpose in having them do it, to read every annotation they write. And so having them tag me for specific things they want to call my attention to is helpful. And then the when. That's kind of small, sorry. But I've asked them, I've asked them, we divided the novel into parts. I said, for each part, I want you to write 3 annotations and 2 responses. I want your annotations done by a certain time, and then I want your responses done by a certain time. So be very clear about what you're asking, why you're having them do it, how you want them to do it, and by when they need to do it. And give them a rubric. I really, really hate rubrics. So I like to keep my rubrics as simple as possible. So for me, it was just, did you do it? And were you thoughtful about it? So you can just see, sorry. Maybe go back one real quick, Adolfo. So yeah, I think, for Excelente, the full credit, you turned in at least 14 total annotations on time. I think there was a total of 16. So, I mean, to get full credit, like for me, they didn't have to do all 16. I know that could maybe get a bit laborious. So whatever, if they did at least 14, that was great. Anyway, you could do it however you want to do it, but for me, it was, did you do it, and did you do it thoughtfully? For me, just saying like, oh, that's cool to, or I don't get it, that wasn't very thoughtful. So. And yeah, I think I was really impressed by what they will do. So I have some examples here. Let's see. So you can see that there's some tags here, the analysis, and then the bottom one, somebody tagged like they made a prediction. And you can see that they kind of wrote a good amount. There's some language issues here, but again, like that doesn't matter for the social annotation. And I think like even when we annotate something, even in our native language, I don't think we're worrying about punctuation or we're just, this person or these people, they're getting their thoughts out, and they're doing it in Spanish. They're getting I think it's pretty cool. Like these things that they're coming up with. And okay, you can click on the next one, Adolfo. And here's an example of a thread. So somebody has talked about, this thread is about women in the text. And then the response is like, they do say, oh, that's interesting, which I'm like, don't just say interesting, but then they keep going. And then there's another comment, and then I commented. So you can see how it does start to create a bit of a dialogue. And then my favorite annotation of the semester. So Paco, like I told you about, one of the main characters, he kind of has this like consciousness raising throughout the novel. And so this, you know, and again, like here's an example of this person, like they're using this social annotation, they're using their own language to kind of, they're annotating it to make sense for them. So Paco is woke AF, like I love it. That's an example of that person using it for them. Okay, keep going. All right, so then at the end of last semester, since this was a pilot program last year, we did, or the group on campus that was running the pilot, they did a survey of students. And so from my particular class, so I had one class, 12 of my 18 students had never used the social annotation tool, and 4 of them had actually used Hypothesis. And then the vast majority of the students found using Hypothesis extremely easy or somewhat easy. So 15 out of 16, so almost all of the students said that using Hypothesis resulted in them reading the course material either much more or somewhat more closely. And 12 of 16 said that their work in Hypothesis resulted in them understanding the material either much or somewhat more. So that's kind of the numbers. And then in terms of the comments, you know, we got some very positive feedback from my students. And I think in most of the classes that use Hypothesis. So easy to follow along with the physical copy of the reading. So my students did have the actual physical text because of, so something to consider, and I think Adolfo might talk about this, but we had to talk with our librarian about this. Is it fair use to, because you do have to use a PDF with Hypothesis or some kind of electronic version of a text. So it was advised to us that it was not fair use for us to give students a PDF of the novel. So our students did have to buy the novel and we used the PDF. So you know, that was kind of a thing, like our students going to be upset that we're having them have basically 2 copies of the text. But I was pleased that at least one student didn't seem to be bothered by that. So easy to follow along with physical copy of the reading. Next, allowed me to read the content more closely than I would have otherwise. And then this idea of this conversation, seeing my classmates' annotations often made me revisit sections that they found important. And the small groups, so the students were in groups, I think of 4 or 5. And yeah, so this idea of being in kind of a little bit safer, feeling a little safer in smaller groups versus a larger class can be a little intimidating. And awesome to have conversations without the pressure of facing everyone. Some feedback would just be to make it easier to use. So so there were a couple of comments from my students about the ease of using Hypothesis. It's quite easy to set up. And I think that at least one of kind of the things that was confusing for students in the spring is not an issue. At least I didn't see it this fall when I used it. So hopefully in its iterations, it's becoming easier and easier to use. So I think, are those my slides? Oh yes, and then I had a shout out to our on-campus I think she kind of led the hypothesis pilot last year. Her name is Shauna Crossan, and she just has done amazing work for us. So a shout out to her. I don't think she's here today, but she's great.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'll try to rush to my section so that we have some time for questions and discussion. So the part that I'm covering is for Finnish class, and this is advanced Finnish. This is 6th semester Finnish, and my lights just went off, so I have to move a little. So just thinking in terms of your own teaching context, does type in the chat what is the average number of students that you have in your courses 6 semesters and up? Just give me an idea in the chat. How many students you have in Spanish 6th level and up, or whatever language you teach, just to have an idea. And I'm asking you this just to give you a context. So this is a Finnish class, and as you can imagine, there are not that many students enrolled in a Finnish 6 semester course. Therefore, the really the level of commitment was much higher, and also the stakes were much higher for Dan in making this actually something that would allow him to engage the students in multiple ways. He started using social annotation while during the pandemic-induced remote teaching, and he found this as a possible solution to, again, keep students engaged and motivated throughout the course, not to lose and retain all of the students. And particularly, from his teaching experience, he knows that oftentimes the students do not do all of the readings, and especially at the advanced level. So it was a way to get them to get more engaged from that part, just by doing some more of the readings. And in particular, the way he went about doing the social annotation, he wanted to socialize key vocabulary items that were important for understanding the reading, but also to provide a general level and contextualization of the cultural references that were embedded within the readings. So one of the things he did, he actually annotated first the readings himself, by highlighting unfamiliar words, providing glosses, and also providing cultural references of the readings. The goal of doing this was to prepare students for deeper discussion during class time, and also to allow them to socialize again the concepts more thoroughly. The texts were uploaded into the course management system, and there were two different types that he used. He used PDF text, but also some websites with news articles and other informational text. And the way that it was implemented in terms of grade, it was done very simply. Students were required and expected to have at least one text annotated per week, and also to have a response as well. Some of the key advantages that he found through this process is that his initial goal of keeping students motivated did reflect that with the inclusion of these annotation. Students were much more knowledgeable about the text itself, but also more motivated. And again, understanding the cultural references was key in allowing them to have deeper understanding of the reading, and therefore being more motivated to learn more about the different meanings that they could and others come up with from the reading. The other positive aspect was that he was able to track how students actually completed the readings beforehand, and therefore having a better sense of what aspect to cover during class discussion. And it also promoted more interaction, as Stephanie showed in some of the examples, between student and also student-instructor interaction. And again, going back to the power that this tool provides, or this strategy provides, allowing students who may be a little more quiet to be more open to expressing their viewpoints more comfortably. Some limitations that he found was that once the texts are annotated, for instance, I told you that he annotated the text initially with cultural references. He found that these are not transferable, so he cannot recycle them for the next course. He has to do that over again. And one key factor in the success of the integration is that the instructions need to be fairly clear. As Stephanie already pointed out, you need to let the students why they are doing this, how you want them to do it, and when they would be doing their submissions. Just a key points to keep in mind for your consideration if you wish to engage into this type of project. So one of the important questions to start out with is determining what is the language in which you want the students to annotate, and thinking not only the level of the class, but also the type of deep thinking that you want them to engage in. So deciding between you want the annotations in the target language or in their native language is important. One important recommendation as well is to always have a simple activity that they can use just for a trial run, getting familiar with the different features of the tool, and also just ironing out any difficulties that you would expect, so that when they do it for real, there are a few things to iron out and fewer issues to run into. One recommendation in terms of the teaching aspect of it, providing good models on what the expectation is, as Stephanie pointed out. Just saying, I find this interesting may not be the type of commentaries and annotations that you are after, but you need to also provide them with a clear expectation of what it is that you're looking for in their comments in the readings. For the first assignment, providing them with some guiding questions that would guide their thinking as they approach the reading was also beneficial. And then allowing the students to use tagging is a powerful tool that can allow students to revisit some of the problematic areas of the reading, for instance, or revisiting some of the characters that more don't need to be chronological. They can just go by content using the tag function. And just switching it up and allowing students to switch groups might also be something to consider. Just a key considerations in terms of technical aspects. Stephanie already mentioned the copyright component. It's a big consideration, since the majority of the articles, if you do use some of the readings, would need to be in PDF or an online version that is available. So that's something to consider. The availability of the text in a digital form is crucial. And also just getting familiar with the process of uploading and creating the assignment into your course management system, so that you can track completion and interactions as the students move along. And I went over for a few minutes, but that concludes our presentation portion. We can entertain any questions, comments, anything else that you'd like to know. We'll be happy to answer any questions. And Stephanie, I'm bringing you back so that if we have any questions at all.
So there are a couple of, sorry, Adolfo.
I was just reading your question, but you can go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we did have a couple of questions in the chat, but they're just from Yana and I. And so we could certainly be patient if there were other folks who wanted to add questions to the chat, or even use the raise hand function to ask their questions live if they had any.
Well, I see I guess. Oh. Hi, Susan. So I see Linda's question. Is this a regular, can you stop sharing your screen, Adolfo? And then do we have a gallery view, or is this a webinar thing?
Yes,
Oh,
I can stop.
Oh, there.
There we are.
Oh. Okay.